Muito bem, vamos tratar agora de assunto
We will now address the issue of Fishbowl regulation, innovative instruments and partnerships for development. And to conduct this discussion, the main specialist of the IDB, Maria Netto, and the guests are Marcelo Barbosa, president of the CVM, Juan Ketterer, head of the Division of Capital Markets and Connectivity of the IDB, and Bruno Laskowsky, Director for Participations, Capital Market and Indirect Credit of BNDES. Comments by José Cláudio dos Santos, Vice President of Badesul, the Development Agency of Rio Grande do Sul, and Cláudio Guimarães Jr., Executive Director of the ABBC. So with the floor, the moderator, Ms. Maria Netto. Thank you. It's a pleasure for the IDB to open this panel, a panel with many friends and important people. Marcelo from CVM, Bruno from BNDES, and Juan Ketterer from the IDB. We are going to have a panel to discuss financial innovation and regulation, considering several important trends for our economy, trends that are related to digitalization and sustainability, but also related to economic recovery, especially considering the crisis we are undergoing with the COVID pandemic. I'd like to give the floor to each of the panelists so that they can provide their perspective on the topic, and then we will have a fishbowl, which means we'll have commentators on different dimensions and reactions from our panel members on these perspectives. And reminding you that we are going to have people speaking Portuguese and English, and so if you wish to access the translation, you can click on the globe icon to listen to translation to Portuguese or English. Without further ado, I'd like to give the floor to Marcelo Barbosa from CVM. Thank you and welcome. Thank you, Maria. Thank you for the participation to participate in the Development Forum. And I'd like to greet my panel colleagues, Bruno, Juan, Cláudio, and Maria, who has been participating in so many activities with us. I apologize if I left anyone out. Now, straight to the point of the topic of the panel, I'd like to highlight that for the market, from the perspective of a capital market regulator, sustainable development and innovation, they go hand in hand with our agenda. They permeate our market development agenda. There are estimates for additional GDP in Brazil around 3 trillion reais until 2030, generation of over 2 million jobs, and with a green economy that can attract more investment and drive greater competitiveness in our economy. And obviously, this will depend on regulation and oversight that are adequate, and also on innovation of financial market innovations, as well as financial markets. Our regulation of the market in Brazil, and any market that is developed, it is based on the assumption of the insurance of transparency and availability of information in a timely manner and a comprehensive manner. So the ESG theme has been included with new
tools as well in the area of sustainable finance and partnerships. We follow up this subject not only at the national level in the Brazilian market, but also the international level, especially in the more relevant forum for us that gathers the regulators of capital markets, and where we have a task force last year to address some topics of this sustainability agenda. So we have three main ones. One is transparency, transparency in the ESG, in the managers of products, mitigating the risk of undesired practices that sometimes come. I'm talking about greenwashing. So it is just a superficial creation of an appearance of adherence to environmental and sustainability aspects, but has no content. So it should be fought. And finally, we have the area of rating on ESG and classification entities. In IOSCO 2019, we already defined, we could see that it is essential and crucial to leverage resources. And we have had some important progress in our regulation. First, public hearing and collection of public opinions about the reference form. In two senses. First, to eliminate redundancies and simplification of the form, which will mean potential reduction around 1/3 and maybe more of the volume of the form. And also the improvement of information about social and environmental and governance aspects of listed companies. We're also working with potential use of crowdfunding for positive social environmental programs, and also in the public hearing about the reform for fund regulation, of funds for regulations. We are addressing the FIDICs that are social and environmental. I also think it is important to mention the Laboratory for Financial Innovation, a partnership that is very important, the lab. It was created and established by ABDE and GIZ, and based on the lab, we have generated several very important initiatives contributing to the development of new products, discussion of new practices based on the 4 groups or working groups of the lab: ESG risk and transparency and others. I can mention other initiatives later on if needs be, but for now I will conclude so that we can respect time. Thank you again for the invitation and congratulations for the organization of this forum. Yes, congratulations to CVM too, that has made major effort towards aligning these international initiatives, such as IOSCO, participation in capital markets, and being open as well regarding positive impacts, as well as environmental safeguards. So it is interesting to talk about also your efforts regarding innovation and in the financial area, FIDICs and crowdfunding. What is a green FIDIC? And how can we increase safety in the market so we create this green market but avoiding greenwashing, right? Bruno, BNDES, could we talk to you? So we're talking about this agenda and what are your perspectives about these important perspectives, not only in Brazil, but in Latin America, such as integration of sustainability and economic recovery, etc. Thank you, Maria. Thanks for the invitation. I'd like to thank Sérgio. And also I'd like to salute all my colleagues here, Marcelo Barbosa. We have a lot of contact. And Cláudio as well, from Badesul, Antonio, and also you, Maria. Thank you. Well, to get the ball rolling, I'd like to speak very briefly about, very swiftly about the way the BNDES is taking a stand. We have 5 main blocks which we define for 21-22. We're talking disinvestment strategy, and I can go into further detail, but it is a recycling of capital, and this logic has a lot to do with the new educational process. We're going to talk about ESG, impact funding, but we can go into greater detail. But everything that has to do with services bank, it is, well, BNDES, it is an investment bank, I would say the biggest one. And in terms of mandates, we have over 200 mandates. It is a bank that does privatizations, concessions, subjects in the media at all times, and everything that has to do with project finance and co-financing. We already have innovation. What is course, non-recourse, completion, non-completion, and how we apply this to ESG, everything that has to do with SMEs. It is an anti-cyclic policy. Just to give you an idea of the dimension in terms of numbers in this process during the pandemics, if we gather last year and the beginning of this year, we are talking over 150 billion injection in the economy. And Marcelo also spoke about the FIDICs. Everything that has to do with credit insurance, we understand that you can potentialize the capital, the existing capital, creating leveraging in the market, especially in acute moments of the economy. And the example of the pandemics is very appropriate. When the economy is more acute, bankers manage risk. Risks increase and they manage. So what did we do? We have a structure for credit insurance with very large numbers, 20 billion from budget resources from treasury. So we have the first loss, and then there's a structure for coverage in such a way that we can irrigate the economy with over 92 billion covering over 120,000 companies. And this model that we understand, it is innovative, and it is inside the compound of shares of initiatives, I beg your pardon, of BNDES. The balance of BNDES is quite robust. We have a spread of over 50% and over 500 billion. But when we potentialize insurance, with the credit insurance, we can multiply this management. In Brazil, we have over 4 trillion in credit from micro to large companies. So these amounts are very significant. This is also an agenda that is very important to us. And the agenda, the ESG agenda. And we are studying and we will execute a large project regarding carbon markets. We are very firmly involved in these discussions, and we understand there is huge opportunity. Brazil is the generator of this competence, this natural competence, and very clear in the country in the generation of opportunities for carbon offsetting. And we provide more consistency to this.
So we are talking with several partners, classification agencies and project designers, AB3, and to gain a vision of marketplace, and BNDES can purchase credits, kind of a backstop for us to be able to buy carbon credits. We can be market makers in a way that will allow us more logic, more rationale in the pricing process, developing the market, and obviously with an important marketplace to provide consistency. This is to develop and create new market opportunities, not to speak of the green bond emission and so on. So in BNDES, we have 100 participations. If I look at the investment funds, we have more than 200 companies. And so we can do all the surveys of emissions and the potential, the marketplace. It's like an internal marketplace in ABBDE. And I also responsible for the restructuring area here. Just to give you an idea, we have around 40 billion in our portfolio. But also a lot of discussions need to be carried out, but why not accept carbon credits to improve the recovery of these companies? Thank you once again. I'm going to conclude here. Thank you for the invitation. It was great, Bruno, to hear about so many innovations. We are aware of the important role of BNDES. We will discuss the role of public banks, and it is playing an intermediary role more than financing directly. And for IDB, it was a pleasure to participate in the support of the FGPA, and which had guaranteed success, not only in the leveraging, but also in the response that allowed a quick response, a quick recovery. And it's an example to be considered in the future, the role of the bank, this expanded role for the bank. And we will address this at the end. It's interesting to see a public bank developing the market. It's a lot of innovation. I would like to give the floor now to Juan Ketterer. We are going to hear what the IDB has been doing in Brazil in general regarding the role of the development banks, and also in general in terms of regulation with all these trends that we are discussing here, that and the need to rethink the financial system.
This what I'm going to talk a little bit is what happened to us as a multilateral institution right after the crisis due to the pandemics. And, you know, we did many things during last year in the pandemics environment. But what I want to address is not so much what we did, but what we're thinking moving forward. And one of the things that we have to do is to try to reestablish a strategic focus on certain things that have changed a great deal as a consequence of the pandemic. And this strategic thinking has to be around 6 pillars. One is about the efficiency of the use of the capital. I'm talking about from the point of view of a bank, okay? Multilateral bank, still a bank. So the first is efficiency in the use of capital. Second is the inclusivity of our strategies, the sustainability from the climate point of view, strategic use of resources, and a sort of holistic view of our asset liability management. So the first thing is that we believe that not only for the ADB, but also for many other development banks, capital is becoming really scarce, up to the point in which we are also capital constrained, and I guess that many of you also are. And given the fiscal environment in which everybody, all the countries have gone through a increase in indebtedness, the support of the central governments might be in question in the coming years. So therefore, a capital optimization is an important sort of strategic guide. And that leads to all the questions related to the participation of the private sector. And in here, we have been promoting or thinking of proposing a radical change in our approach to use of public resources. And that is, public resources no longer should be used to finance projects, but rather they should be used to facilitate the financing from the private sector. And that means a risk management approach rather than a financing approach. And that is something which is easily said, but it's a little bit more involved when you have to put it in practice. But I will leave it here at this level of generality, then we can go a little bit in more detail. Second, inclusion. Inclusion to us is parallel to digitalization. The only way in which we can really go about including people from the financial point of view is if we bet big time on digitalization. Okay. Third, sustainability, climate sustainability. Climate sustainability is something that it should be maybe not the highest priority, I don't know, but among definitely the highest priorities, because that is a sine qua non condition for development of the world. If the world goes in certain direction, you know, the rest won't really matter that much. Then our strategic focus on 2 things. One is digitalization of SMEs. One of the lessons of the crisis is that digitalization, those who were more digital enabled were able to do better than those who were digitally less focused. So I think that in any program from now into the future in which we deal with SMEs, digitalization has to be one of the important aspects of the program. And again, this is also something that is easily said. When you get down to do it, it's a little bit more involved than you think of. So it really deserves a good deal of thought. We at the ABDE have been doing this for the last, I would say, 2 years, and we have come up with certain solutions, but we're not completely satisfied as to the level of output that we have in this realm. And the last thing that I wanted to talk about is the management of asset liabilities. Okay, usually when you are a bank, you do something on the asset and then you use your balance to finance this, and then you manage your liabilities, and at some point you reach your sweet spot of equilibrium between asset liabilities, and you take the risk that you think is best for your institution under the regulatory guidelines. And that's the standard, that has been the standard procedure. But now what's happening is that since we're going to have to deal with the co-financing of the private sector, that implies, or that will imply many times, that operations will have to be done off balance. Okay? Therefore, if we deal with off-balance operations, we have to be able to set up the liability side of these sort of vehicles that will conduct the off-balance operations. They have to be able to issue a very particular type of papers or instruments, financing instruments, to accommodate for the risk tolerance of the assets investments of this particular vehicle and all the partners involved. So in many of our financial institutions, there is no knowledge enough to be able to develop these products. So we think that one of the most important tasks that we have to accomplish in the very short near future is to build up internal capacity on this area, on the area of structuring, so that we are able to deploy off-balance financing vehicles. This is very important. It is also true that many regulatory environments are not so well equipped to deal with the off-balance operations. So we have also to establish communications lines with our regulators so that they are understanding as to what it is that we are doing in this off-balance. One of the examples that links this with the climate finance, for example, is our idea that we have been dealing in particular in Brazil through the financial lab, that is the cover bond idea. This is an innovation that is totally ad hoc for the issuance of green bonds. So if we can, define a vehicle that is exactly tailor-made for this type of investments, then I think we will be able to accomplish a big step forward in terms of bringing third-party financing to this realm or to this space, which is exactly what we are looking for, with a minimal use of our capital as financial institutions. Okay, this is very important because otherwise we'll run out of options pretty soon, and the possibilities of having capital replenishments are constrained by the fiscal positions of our countries. Well, I think that I have run enough, and I will leave it here. And in the rest of the day, we will go a little bit in depth on each one of the strategic ideas that I just put forward. Thank you very much, Maria. Back to you.
Muito obrigado, Juan. Alguns pontos importantes, né?
Thank you, Juan. Many important points the banks starting to think better about the way to structure mechanisms for risking and for risk reduction. And this is not easy. It is a challenge. The lab that we have is a space very important where IDB and CVM and the financial market have been discussing this topic, and also digitalization. You commented digitalization and inclusion and financial inclusion brought by digitalization, in addition to competitiveness. So I will go to this discussion. One of the important areas that we see here is, on the one side, the need of digitalization of the financial system in order to make financing reach the places and it should, but also how to innovate with instruments that are more adequate to the participation of the private sector. So I'd like to call Cláudio about digitalization, and then Marcelo and Juan Ketterer to answer. Good morning. I'd like to salute all of you, Marcelo, Bruno, Maria, and I'd like to thank ABDE for the invitation and for this possibility for us to expand our partnership between ABBC and ABDE for the strengthening of the Brazilian financial market. We are in a moment of transformation that is quite significant. The process of digitalization is there. It is a question of survival. All financial institutions are digitalizing, and the mindset of their steering is also changing. We have an intercession between ABBC and ABDE. Our affiliates, out of the 102 members, we have several fomenting institutions, BNDES, Desenvolve São Paulo, BNDES. So this makes the ecosystem work together in this development, in this process of digitalization. We are living in a process that is very important in the progress of our system. First, the PIX, the new payment system. And this is similar to what we had in 2002 when we implemented the new system in Brazil. Now, we are again going towards the borders of development when we implement the PIX. It is major and brings major challenges as well for institutions and for regulators, the central bank, etc. Now we are leaving the implementation of the open banking in Brazil, which will also bring major transformation. And this will enable inclusion in Brazil. They are so important in Brazil. And the emergence of new products and services where the major beneficiaries will be Brazilian citizens. So the question I'd like to share with Marcelo and Juan goes along these lines. The crisis of the pandemics of COVID-19 impacted the financial system, and the counter-cyclic response and its partners at the international level were decisive for recovery. Marcelo mentioned a few initiatives. And what initiatives can we expect for the biennium to 21-22 in order to consolidate all the progress that we could observe in 2020? Thank you, Cláudio. And we're going to have answers. Marcelo, we have been working quite a lot with CVM. We innovated with Sandbox for fintechs. And Marcelo, could you comment, please? Of course. Innovation is necessary for several angles. First, to maintain the market competitive. And markets compete among themselves across the world for attention and interest of major capital allocators. At the same time, there is competition between agents. Innovation brings security, traceability, portability of investments. This is essential. And in the sandbox, as I mentioned recently, when we opened the first group or the first cohort of Sandbox, we had no idea about how many interested parties would appear. And over 30, the number was surprising, from several states of Brazil. It is excellent. So we had interested parties from all states in Brazil and from abroad. So portability of investments, security, and that was excellent. And we expect to announce the next one, the next group. I think there are also legacies that were important. The use of virtual means to carry out assemblies. So we had to defend legislative changes in the past because the pandemic, in addition to the human drama, which is the main aspect of this tragedy, it started to manifest. And people started to work remotely since March last year. But the end of March was the deadline for companies to disseminate and to publicize their balances. So things happened very fast because companies were able to act and respond very swiftly for their assemblies. So these are legacies. We can see several initiatives such as PIX and open banking. These will also allow for portability of investments with safety, with security. And we can see retail growing this way. And this was a possibility brought by the reduction in interest rates. So innovation is something that we need to embrace and encourage, no doubt, being sure that this is done with security, because our main mandate is protecting investors.
Fantastic, Marcelo. Your comments on transparency and efficiency, as well as a mechanism to increase safety, security. Juan, would you like to respond to a quick response, 2-3 minutes?
I think that we have to be, very clear as to what it is that we are doing in the space of digitalization. And one of the things that we need to have focus is in trying to act in those spaces in which we can act as a multilateral or as a development banks, and those other aspects that just, are changing in the environment and will dictate changes in our strategies as we adapt. That's basically the thing. So I think that there are things that we can act, and one of the things that we can act is, for example, in making a strong push for including in our lending programs digital components, and that can be done in two ways. One is including in our if we're lending second tier or indirect operations, as BNDES calls it, we can use as first tier banks also fintechs. Okay. So that takes a little bit of work from our end, from the end of the fintechs and from the end of the regulators. But that's one of the things that we can do. And the second thing that we should and can do is to try to include digitalization investments in our funding of the SMEs. That is also another thing that takes a lot of effort. Doing it right and do it with purpose is not so easy as it looks. So that is two things that in which we as the ADB at some point, if you want, we can talk about how to do it, our ideas, your ideas. We are really looking forward the possibility of having different implementing, let's say, programs to learn and to be able this market reacts to our ideas. So, but we are, very humble on this part, and we really need to learn from you what you think, how you see this part. But we're really willing, and we have the resources to do it. Thank you. Back to you, Maria.
Muito obrigada, Juan. E muito
Thank you,
importante.
Juan. Very important comments that in addition to being available to work with development banks to structure ways of using digitalization to facilitate and increase the efficiency of financing, and also financing digitalization of small and medium companies, as Juan says, we are all learning. Now, moving to innovative financial instruments, Bruno addressed this topic and talked about new pillars of BNDES. Juan highlighted difficulties and importance of having more sophisticated mechanisms that will consider the need to cover risks, especially in a counter-cyclical situation, and new topics such as sustainability emerging. José Cláudio dos Santos, please comment on this theme, and then Bruno and Juan can respond to Cláudio. I'm sorry, to José Cláudio. Good morning. Good morning to my colleagues on this panel. Thank you to ABDE, President Guzmão, and President of Badesul, Janete, who was unable to attend, and she asked me to come. And we are very happy that Badesul is participating. I don't want to be repetitive, but it's important to highlight that we are going through an evolution of one more stage, another era. We had the agricultural era, the industrial era, and impacts on the world economy. We also underwent globalization and the era of limits more recently. All these eras entail phenomena that add and drive the natural phenomenon of longevity, the evolution of medicine, the era of knowledge. One more phenomenon, the pandemic that we are facing, and also which also causes transformations on people's behavior and people's lives, and in the world economy as well, and local economy. And we need to protect people and the economy. This is our challenge. We might say that it's technological progress. if it weren't for the losses that we are experiencing. This phenomenon is surprising because in the digital world, we have attacks to databases, we have data issues, and so data have gained importance for the market. In this context of connectivity and digital transformation, impacts on the world financial system, redefining the legal status of private banks, public banks, and those that are responsible for promoting development. These are all assumptions that are decisive in trade relations, in public policies in Brazil, in Europe, or any other continent. It's social progress that has as its mission something broader, which is inclusion and other requirements, such as economic recovery based on sustainable basis, a world that has started a transition, a world in transition, a transition towards progress. Climate impacts, health impacts, science, technology, all this going together hand in hand with green finances, and also as part of the agenda of Badesul or any other development system in Brazil, in the world. Badesul has 40 years, but needs to continue promoting development. And so topics such as sustainability, inclusion, cooperation, partnerships, PPPs, that are now part of the agenda of development agencies. All this with coming closer to customers, to clients, investors, and sectors, learning more about the sector, learning more about the customer, about demands, deeper knowledge of micro and small companies and new segments. All this is very important in order to develop products and solutions that adapt in the process of agribusiness, infrastructure, the business world. We need to know deeply, understand deeply what the demand is. And so it's clear that we cannot promote development without thinking of micro and small companies, on digitalization, diversity, reskilling, social protection, including the key pillar of innovation. But at Badesul, we had to address innovation within a legal context that is quite rigid, strict, and this very strict legal framework. Since 2014, we have been trying to work without funding projects, and since 2014. So there is a delay in the legal evolution, in the regulation, which doesn't move with the same speed as the rest of the world and all these advances. There is this mismatch with the legal framework. Our projects, our crowdfunding projects, they were only possible after a public hearing on regulation of platforms. The platforms, they announce these offers. And so we had been for a long time seeking this regulation. And when this was regulated at Badesul, we had the participation in the laboratory of BNDES and ABDE. We were able to achieve a model of operation that allowed us to launch the crowdfunding project, and we are already at the bidding phase. And so these experiences a long time show the mismatch on the legal side. And this experience makes us think how regulation of the whole process, from the formulation of a bidding process, how to simplify all this.
Simplify and optimize everything in order to evolve. So all of this ends up by pushing the market. Regulation pushes the private market faster, but in the public sector, regulation is much larger, and it ends up by jeopardizing innovation in the public area. Just to conclude, the major challenge is simplification of regulation in order to bring about legal security and also flexibility to accelerate the innovation process adequate to the moment of the world. Thank you. José Cláudio Badesul developed the first program of a crowdfunding project by a development institution. It was a result of a lab, and it's a very beautiful work. The role of the lab to promote this innovation, but it also allowed the dialogue with regulators, the CVM, which also facilitated the creation of this innovation. Clearly, innovation permeates, also is permeated by regulation, or around regulation we can do things that may be a bit more risky. And Bruno and Juan, I'd like to hear you about this. How to address financial innovation considering the regulatory framework and the need for fast responses. Thank you, Maria. BNDES has so much going on. It's difficult to align all ideas, but I'll give you 2 or 3 examples of our operations. One very interesting, where BNDES provided collateral in the senior quota that made feasible for a cotejal, for a cooperative could issue, could have its emission. It was a small issuance, but we can multiply, right? So we use the power of balance of the bank, and this allowed the cost of this issue to be cheaper than it would have been if there was no guarantee or collateral in the senior quota. Another interesting example is in the area of indirect credit for agents, especially now during the pandemics, the area that made feasible several programs of public policies, preservation of jobs, etc. We also innovated something very interesting with the Secretariat of Public Policy, SAMTEC, many institutions, which was the maquininhas, where we have this smoke credit program, not in the perspective of discounts of traditional receivables, but future ones. We anticipate resources. So the interesting in this model is that it was totally digital, and the time for the preparation of technological platforms, so it was looking for information with the central banks and the centrals. It was very instrumental in order for us to be able to find so many participants. And 28% of the lenders were MEIs, small companies that never participated in credit before. So it was also a possibility to bring them into the financial market. One other example is the format I just commented of the carbon credit market. And the potential, if we look at that as a country policy with the ability that we have to be this green power, we can rebalance this, the potential, and that's an area where we could make a difference in being a carbon offsetter. And it goes through a different world vision, making the world better, etc. And the way we see a development bank, BNDES, has been established for over 70 years, and the format changes according to characteristics and environments, etc. But the size and the work of BNDES is no longer measured by the size of its balance, but by the impact generated. If we make 100 million people in Brazil lacking in sanitation, if we affect them, if we affect the 35 million people that has no treated water, if they are impacted by our concession projects, so they will be impacted by money of BNDES. And this is a way of fulfilling our mission. This is philosophical in the view of foment institutions. So looking at impacts, this is the most innovative process we can offer the country. Thank you. It is a development bank, aims to develop. And impact is very important, and it needs to be demonstrated, even because of transparency and the fiscal transparency we should have.
Thank you. Well, we as the IDB, we don't have really first-tier operation. We almost our third-tier operation, but we have been very active on this space of the digitalization of financial services is on lobbying, let's say, regulators about the need to update their frameworks to accommodate for these new developments in the financial space. And in that regard, we are managing not only the financial labs in each one of the countries, particularly the most important one and productive one has been the Brazilian case, as Maria and many of you very well know, but we also have this network that we call LAC FinTech, which gathers together all the financial regulators of Latin America and the associations of fintechs. And that has been going on for a year, almost 2 years now, and it's been very successful. And one of the outputs that we're having from this sort of region-wide conversation is not only that I've had the feeling that regulators become more sensitive more receptive to these issues of financial innovation due to digitalization, but also we have come up with a project which is a sandbox of a character regional, that is, whichever results are accomplished in one jurisdiction will be extended to another jurisdiction. So that fintech will not have to go to 5 or 6 different jurisdictions to get the sandbox treatment, but with one jurisdiction, it will extend automatically to the other 5 or 6. So that's, I think, a very important advance. I mean, it's not operational yet, but it will be operational soon. And I think that this will really contribute and enhance the growth of fintech, because there is one important thing. Even though for the Brazil case, Brazil is a very large country, but if you look around you, the region are not so, the countries are not so large in general. So the fintechs have a problem of scale. And that is something which is also very important to understand. But even for the fintechs which live in Brazil, extending to different jurisdictions is a problem because they have to deal with each one of them. Through this sandbox device, it is hoped that we are going to be able to reduce substantially the transaction costs. Okay, so that I think that we're running out of time, so I'm going to leave it here and back to you, Maria.
Muito obrigado, Juan. Na última
Thank you, Juan.
ronda de discussão, eu vou dar
In the last round of discussion, I will give 3 minutes for each of the speakers. We spoke digitalization, development, impact, but I would like to go back to sustainability. Regarding sustainability, we can see something that Marcelo mentioned in the beginning, a trend on the part of international investors seeking for assets that have positive impact. And it is pressure by the market to see good governance on the environmental area. And also, as Bruno mentioned, the potential of creating new markets. So the fact that we're here, ABDE and CVM, we have a lab gathering over 250 players, regulators, capital market agents, etc., specialists, etc. So I'd like to ask you how you see financial innovation in order to promote sustainable development. What is the role of regulators of a bank such as ABDE, I beg your pardon, and I'd like to start with Marcelo. Very relevant question. On the perspective of a regulator, it is important to allow access to information about aspects related to sustainability, governance, and other ESG topics, so that investors can make their choices. The large capital allocators, retailer investments, especially new generation ones, they make their choices very much based on the way issuers do. And obviously I'm talking about securities issues, right? Issuers. And they need to provide this information because certainly they are important for those who make investments. And this is an important proposal of the 480 document. So we are not suggesting the adoption of these practices. We cannot do that. What we can do and we propose to be done is to require companies and issuers to explain how they address these policies in their scopes, so that it is clear for the market and so that investors can take their decisions regarding investment with this important element present in the main markets. And in Brazil, we should not be different, and otherwise we would be not aligned with the rest. And it is also important for us to have a stand that is receptive to innovation in terms of development of products for green finance. Be it through the lab or with other partnerships, we always have a stand of open dialogue about these innovations so that we can ensure that the Brazilian market will rely on these investments, not only competitive in terms of return, but also that create positive impacts.
In terms of sustainability as well, with consequences, positive consequences at an expanded level. Thank you for your participation and support, Marcelo. I'd like to give the floor to Bruno. You addressed the carbon market, and IDB has strong interest from a regional point of view, especially in the forest sector. But as you said, there are other areas. So please, your final remarks. Once again, Maria, thank you. It was an excellent panel, excellent discussion. On the dynamics of innovation, anything we say entails digitalization, access to credit, and today almost 52% of BNDES disbursements, they are made to micro and small companies. Just to give you an idea, in our area of fund allocation, we have 4 billion just for FDICs. There's a structure, a whole structure that was built in a very innovative view, from a normative point of view, with pricing curves, and so that we can remunerate capital appropriately and also increase access to credit for those who most need it. Almost 4 billion until the end of the year on these initiatives. And we have an IoT fund, and we are going to create the BNDES garage. In the previous edition, we had over 5,000 enrollments. We have interesting cases of investments, such as Magna Medi, company that grew a lot with mechanical ventilators. Agricultural equipment, there is an acceleration, and also on microeconomics, we have a project and we generate added value. A company that was accelerated 1.5 degrees, detecting forest fires, and also along the lines of the supervision that we conduct. And on the side of funding, when we issue green bonds, we are able to create a lighter balance. And at the same time, we talk about sustainability, but I'd like to mention governance as well, because we have, through our funds, we have 200 companies, we have something around 49 council members, and we are conducting an intensive campaign to increase women, to increase the diversity on our boards. Recent information, we have an average of 11% women on boards. We have achieved 14%. It's still low, but it's a trend towards improving diversity and governance. It's many themes, but once again, thank you for the invitation. And I will be available to discuss alternative solutions, whatever you want. Congratulations, Bruno, for the innovation, the work on innovation that you've been doing, and creation of new, and also management of funds. As we spoke with Marcelo, this is very important. Governance is an ally and very much connected to social environmental risk management. Juan, last remarks on the part of IDB. I'm sorry, I will have to say goodbye. Thank you. It was a pleasure to join you. Thank you, Bruno. It was good to have you.
Well, first of all, I just wanted to say thank you to everybody for the participation on this workshop. Second, I would like to remark and to reassure everyone the commitment of the ADB to aid the climate, in this particular case, the climate investments. Second, the technology and digitalization. And third, to our work here in Brazil through many different windows, but in particular through the ABDE. One of the things that I have to thank you also for is for your support in giving us ideas and being the source of good advice. And after years of dealing with many of you and listening to you and discussing stuff with you, we came up with an interesting solution that ties the digital aspects and the climate dimension of our activities that we presented yesterday. And that is a platform that we call the Greenbone Transparency Platform, which is a platform in which we are going to find all relevant information about one of the most mysterious things that surround the green bond market, and that is the use of proceeds and the impact of the investments. So that is a major deterrent for investors, particularly international investors, to come to invest to the green bonds of the region. That is the lack of reliable information as to the use of proceeds and its impact. And I think that with this platform and with the help of you all, we will be able to definitely make it much easier for everybody to understand what's going on with the proceeds of the issuance of the bonds. And this will definitely bring discipline to the green bond market, will practically do away with greenwashing, and also, and mostly important, will be able to attract worldwide investors to the region and to our green, precious green assets that we have to preserve and we have to nurture, because this is the future of our world. And I cannot think of any more noble endeavor than doing this. So I thank you very much for your support, and thank you very much, Maria, for your great work, and back to you.
Muito obrigado, Juan. Aí ficou
Thank you,
também,
Juan.
de fato, Juan anunciando o Green Bond.
Juan announcing the Green Bond Transparency Platform, which will be launched in Brazil. There are several Brazilian partners, including BNDES, Susana Clabin, and Huej are participating. And as we mentioned to Marcelo, the idea is to promote greater transparency and capacity of investors and emitters to navigate the market. To conclude, I'd like to thank ABDE for the opportunity of conducting such an important discussion. Financial innovation in terms of regulation and the world of public banks is very important, not only because of the problems that we see because of the pandemic, but also important opportunities in the future that will conduct to digitalization and sustainability. Thank you all for a wonderful